Good evening, good evening. Hey Janelle, what's up, girl? How y'all doing? Woo! Hey Carla, how is everyone? How's everybody doing this evening? Thank you for all tuning in to No Ordinary Woman Chat Show, a platform to inspire everybody. Sorry guys, I'm just kind of trying to adjust. I'm sorry that I'm slightly late, but I was having some technical glitches. It is Friday. Oh my gosh, I have been waiting for this day. Like, it is just so awesome to be able to say the end of the week has now arrived. I'm so looking forward to Bank Holiday Monday. It's crazy because obviously in this lockdown season, we would think that everybody is just like, you know, chilling and everything. Well, myself and Janelle, we are still working that 9 to 5 and doing the show. Hey Serena, thank you guys for joining. Thank you so much. So how are you guys been doing? Today we have an amazing guest. Her name is Zainab, and she is a cognitive behavior therapist, and cognitive behavior therapist, and she is she's a psychologist as well. So I'm going to request for her to join us, and she's going to just really just kind of like summarize what we've been discussing so far in regards to Mental Health Awareness Week. And there she is, Zainab. I'm going to request you. Hey Yvette, thank you for joining. Hey Zainab, how are you, beautiful?
I'm good, and yourself?
I am well. I am so well. I mean, it's sunny, and it's, well, not sunny like yesterday, but it's still really, really nice. And even though we got the little breeze and everything, I am appreciating that breeze. But boy, the hay fever.
I know.
The hay fever. Yes. So Zainab, I mean, for those that don't know much about you, if you can just give us just let us know about your profession and how you got started, and just take it from there.
Oh gosh, I work as a Gestalt psychotherapist and also a cognitive behavioral therapist. And I work in higher education. I also work as a lecturer, which I've been doing for about almost 2 years now. Really enjoying that. How did I start? I started off just doing the usual stuff in university.
Hold on 1 second. But are you not a professional singer as well?
I am a singer, and I'm learning to play the guitar. So I've got lots of
How many
in my basket. And
woman, you are wearing too many hats.
I am. I'm also a parent to a 10-year-old, so there's lots to juggle on a daily basis. But yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So how did you get started? Sorry, I kind of interrupted you because I just needed people to know that you can sing.
Well, I started, going to university and doing a psychology degree because I've always had an interest in psychology and working, particularly keen on looking at the mind and, the brain and how the brain works and the neuropsychological aspects of psychology. So that's been it's still an ongoing passion, which is why I do CBT, because that's really centered around the brain and looking at how the brain works and that sort of thing. So that's where the journey started. And then I did a Gestalt training at Metanoia. And
what's Gestalt? What's the Gestalt? What is that?
Gestalt is a type of therapy, is a talking therapy really, that looks at, helps people to raise awareness to their behaviors and kind of patterns of thinking, which are usually quite negative, because that's how the brain is. So we look at helping people to work through those process, what you're telling yourself, what you are also feeling, and how that's informing how you feel, but also what you do in response to that. And then we do that through, not just through talking, but doing things like reenactment behavioral experiments. So it kind of meets quite nicely with CBT, because CBT really looks at the dynamic of what someone's thinking, and certainly external triggers, sometimes internal triggers of our thoughts, and also how our thoughts affect how we feel, and then what we do in response to that. That can be quite unhelpful sometimes, those kind of behaviors that keeps the problem going. And so we look at, you know, mostly problem solving and exploring things that you're thinking and how you can change them, how you can challenge them, how you can look for alternatives. But also, most importantly, with cognitive behavioral therapy, we focus on the behavior as well, because the idea is what you're thinking is, you have a thinking brain, so that's how you make sense of your experience, that's how you make sense of the world. So we can't really change the fact that our brain is thinking. We can challenge them, we can look at them, we can try doing different things. So that's where the behavior comes in. And essentially, if you're having a negative thinking or a negative thought pattern, that's going to activate kind of uncomfortable feelings. So I don't like to say negative feelings. I like to refer to them as feelings that make you feel uncomfortable, because feelings are feelings, right? So good or bad, as long as they match the experience, they match what's going on, there's nothing bad about them. But some of them are very uncomfortable. We don't like feeling them. So I like to call them uncomfortable feelings. But, you know, it's the things that we do that keeps those negative, that cycle going. And it's looking at really how you break that cycle, how you break the pattern. So there's a lot of problem solving. There's a lot of helping people to make sense of their experience, and through psychoeducation, through just self-explorative work, through behavioral experiments. So you get them to practice things in the session, and then they do that for homework as well. And hopefully, I mean, it's an evidence-based practice, so it does work. And, you know, you get to kind of help people to develop these skills that they...
So what ages are these individuals? I mean, because you're saying about, you know, obviously you mentioned that majority of our thinking is negative, right? So if majority of our thinking is negative, I mean, one would have to, you know, explore that. Not everybody would know that unless they speak about it with their, you know, their peers, their families, etc. So even you saying that to me is quite surprising, because I just thought that, you know, it's just maybe me that's having these kind of way of thinking, not knowing that how the majority of us have that, you know, majority of our thinking is negative.
Yes.
And why is that?
It's the brain. That's how the brain works, you know, because we have a brain that was developed when we used to cohabit with really dangerous animals in the wild. So our brains are geared up to look for threat in the world, you know. So when we walk down the streets, we're looking for threats. And some of those information that we take in, they may not be representative of what we're actually going through, but it might be from things that we watch in the media, things that people tell us, things that we read in books, and things that we watched in movies. So our brains are absorbing all these things.
But then isn't that language then? Isn't that because as a child, you're not going to have negative thinking? Do you understand what I'm saying? So isn't that just something that obviously based upon language, relationships, depending on the culture you've been born into and things like that, that's where the negative way of thinking then develops?
Yeah, it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be language led. You know, it can be lots of what we pick up is also on an unconscious level, but it's non-vocabulary. So you don't have to have words to pick up something frightening. You know, a recent study shows that 86% of what we tell ourselves is negative. So therefore, only 24% is the other, and we don't know if the other is positive or not. So these are things that we need to be mindful about. So we need to understand what the brain does. The brain has a collective of systems that are constantly fighting against each other. You know, when you have an experience or you're feeling anxious about something, you need to really be realistic. Am I feeling this? Is this something that's for me, or is this something that's coming from a memory of something, or something that my brain is taking in from something that I've seen or other people have told me? So it's just really being aware and being able to make those switches between when your brain gets a bit, you know, it starts to catastrophize and start to be quite impulsive. it's the same system as when you watch animals in the wild, the way they interact, and you know, that kind of threat system. We are no different from that. We're not really too far away from that. So we've got to be really kind of mindful and be able to switch, which is why I do a lot of psychoeducation on the brain, and I do group work, and I do one-to-one psychoeducation, because I think once you learn, you get to understand, you can then switch the brain off when it goes off, because it will do so naturally. But similarly, when we add to kind of start thinking in a negative way, or start even interacting with that negative intrusive thoughts, you know, when I say interactive, if I'm walking down the street, for example, and I'm thinking that people are watching me, and people are going to say something negative about me, or people are thinking I'm unattractive, or whatever it is that I might be thinking at the time, that's what my brain is telling me, right?
But then isn't that a story that you're creating within yourself based upon, you know, like what you're saying, based upon behavior and, you know, the culture and everything else? So that's the story.
Based upon your experiences, right? So things that you've experienced, but similarly, things that other people have told you. So our brains is taking in information all the time, and we're not necessarily conscious of what we're taking in.
So how then do we reprogram that way of, you know, getting rid of all of those things that doesn't serve us? Do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm assuming this is where like cognitive behavior therapy and everything else comes in, right?
Yeah. So that's where it comes in. So you kind of help the person to make sense of that kind of, that cycle. Yeah. So where do you get yourself stuck? Do you get yourself in your head? And if so, how do you get out of that? So you do that in a way that empowers the person to come up with their own outcome, with their own, ways of doing things. So how, if you're in your head all the time, how do you get yourself to switch off? What are some of the things that you might apply, some of the things that you might try? But similarly, to be aware that sometimes when I have these thoughts, it's going to make me feel in this way. So I can normalize those experiences. I can normalize that. So if I tell myself really scary things, or my brain intrusively tells me something scary, and I listen to it and I collude with it, then that's going to activate something negative in my body. And the more I focus on my body, the more it's going to make me feel even more anxious, or even more scared. And so sometimes we have to look at these kind of self-help guides, because you can read someone's self-help guides, which a lot of them are really helpful, but are you able to apply them for yourself? Are you able to look at how your system, how your process is affected, and how you can change your own biology, your own experience, your own, we like to call it the phenomenological experience of an individual, right? So what's my own process? How can I integrate this, or maybe sometimes apply it so that it makes sense for me? So that's kind of how I work, you know, on a person basis, really looking at your own system. You know, for me, it's not fitting an individual into a structure, but it's actually finding a way to adapt so that that person is able to understand. So therefore, I've worked with people that have not just mental health issues, but also learning difficulties, you know, dyslexia, ADHD, or autism. So where sometimes they're not able to rationalize so clearly, they're not able to make sense of what's going on. People that have trauma, who often experience this kind of lack of words, lack of vocabulary to express what's happening for them. So, you know, a lot of what I do is bringing awareness to that, which is where the Gestalt comes in, but also the CBT, doing that in the here and now, but also helping them to look at the behaviors that they engage in. You know, thinking is a behavior, but people don't know that thinking is a behavior.
But then it's like having awareness, really, isn't it? You know, it's about being aware. And the thing is, I find, even for myself, I wasn't aware of certain behaviors that I had. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I think even going back to what you was just saying, in terms of reading, you know, you can read so many self-help books, etc. And somebody's even mentioned it's about, you need to apply, like there has to be a level of action. But as it's Mental Health Awareness Week, if you are, say, like Leah shared about, you know, being bipolar, how would she then deal with something like this? Do you know what I mean? In terms of like CBT, how can this be beneficial for like Leah? you know, and anybody else who's dealing with bipolar.
Yeah. I think sometimes also with a lot of mental health, there's a lot of stigma around it. So, you know, people that have bipolar, there is this tendency that when you have bipolar that you can't be in relationships, or you can't operate in a normal way. You know, when I say normal, that you can't live a life that's normal. And there's a lot of fear around bipolar, and certainly even psychosis, there's a lot of fear around that. But I think it's about schooling that person and helping them to make sense of what's going on, helping them to make sense of what's happening in their lives. Because when they're able to have, I work with people that have bipolar, I work with people that are suicidal, really quite extreme cases. But when you're able to make someone understand that actually some of what's happening is yours, some of what's happening is your brain, and how do you then try to operate within that? So you switch off when the brain is going off, and you're able to identify what part of this is you, right? And then you bring those two together. And then it's also looking at the behaviors that that person is engaging in. So it's a system that you have to sit down in CBT, what we assess the person, we do a formulation, and then we do psychoeducation. So psychoeducation allows them to really piece everything together, because most of the times you have things in bits, you know, it's all going off in your head, you're not able to make sense of it. So CBT allows you to put things down on paper, write things. So there's lots of writing where you externalizing it and taking things out of your head so that you start to see a different picture, you know?
Yeah.
And it's really...
But thank you for sharing that. But even like listening, because obviously we've had different guests throughout the show, and even listening to Yvette's story in regards to her daughter Leanne taking her life and everything else. Now, with her story, she was basically saying that how she didn't even know that she was sick.
Yeah.
So how can you then say to somebody who doesn't even know that they're sick, okay, you know, talking therapy, do CBT, etc. How would that work? Because I'm just trying to get understanding, because if you've got, like, say, a mental health disorder, so to speak, how then could you then relate the CBT and, you know, all of that, the resources there to be able to help that person if they don't even know that they're unwell? Or do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I know what you're saying, because sometimes we can leave things till it gets to the latter stages where you may not have so much control. But I think it really has a lot of what we need to understand about mental health. We need to start from a very young age, where we're teaching young people in school, at home, what happens to their brain, how they're managing their emotions, and what happens to the emotion. Because I think even in school, because I've worked in school, I've worked in the education system for a very long time, you know, going back to primary, to secondary, university, and also even disabled school, where children did not have the mental capacity to cope. So I would say that you need to start some of those principles from a very young age, where you're allowing children to explore their emotions, to not just shut it down. So when a child comes to you hurting, I want to talk about this, or something's going on and I'm being bullied, we feel, especially as parents or even adults that are carers that are looking after that child, we want to soothe that child. So but very often when we soothe that child, we're stopping them from exploring the difficulty of the emotion and bringing the emotion to surface. So we really need to start doing that and educating children around emotions, and getting them to normalize that, you know, if someone hits you and someone bullies you and you feel pain, that's okay. That's how you should be feeling, because that tells that child that actually what I'm doing is right, and then they can come forward and get help. I know Yvette's story is really, it touches my heart, and everyone that listens to it, you know, you can see how the system failed her. Because I remembered when we did the live audience as well.
Yeah, last year.
The system, you know, the system does fail so many people. The systems are all overstretched, and that's not an excuse at all. I think mental health or mental well-being needs to be managed as a community. Does that make sense? We need to be able to look out for changes in behaviors? Is that person isolating themselves? Is that person
Mm-hmm.
not talking? Is that person, engaging in unusual behaviors, or are they doing drugs? Are they drinking alcohol? Because all of those things would add to your mental health difficulties.
Mm.
Certainly we might think, oh, I'm just going to have, there's so many young adults or so many people that I work with, Kaz, who, when you're assessing them, I can almost tell what is triggering the mental health.
Right.
So many people, they think, it's okay to do drugs. Yes, you can have fun, but it's just to be mindful of how that could trigger psychoactive
Mm-hmm.
responses in your brain. Similarly, alcohol is a depressant. But so many people drink all the time, and
Yeah.
it's really about looking at how you're managing your emotions. Emotions are real, emotions are there, but we need to look at strategies that are more beneficial and more healthy to manage them.
I'm seeing some comments coming through, and oh gosh, my God, no. I'm seeing some comments coming through, and one of the questions that I was seeing is about hormones and how it plays a huge part.
Yes.
That's why, like the PMS, you can make women, express such extreme behavior. And I know for myself, like I will literally have 1 week of this month. Last week was the good month. The good week. I can feel myself going down. I know I'm coming on the 6th of June. So for the next 3 weeks, I'm just not going to be I'm going to be a bit off key. Do you know what I mean? Kind of thing. And with that being said, I mean, how do one get some support with that? Do you know what I mean? Because it's not even spoken about. And even, for, let's say, young girls, teenagers who's now experiencing having their periods, because obviously their body's changing, their moods are changing, they're not able to interact and they're misbehaving and things like that. And it starts from such an early age, but because we're not educated about these things, we don't know how to help, say, our children, our girl child. So what would your organization do? I mean, would you go out and help mums? Do you go out to the schools and etc.? And why isn't the government putting these things in place? I mean, it's just, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I work in a university, so when we do assessment, we factor those things in: hormonal changes, developmental changes. It's so important because you can't, this is why you need to look at things from a holistic perspective. You can't isolate one thing. We're not just one thing when here and there, but it's also, as an individual, to be aware of what your own patterns are. So I remembered.
But as a child, you won't necessarily know your own pattern. You're a child. You don't even know that you're even experiencing this. And this is the thing, because all of this, you've spoken about behavior. And to me, to my understanding, I can now look back as a child and remember me having these certain ways of being when I was coming towards my period. My parents are not educated. I'm not educated. I'm not able to say, oh, because I'm coming on my period, that's why I'm acting this way. Do you know what I mean? Kind of thing. So I just feel that
it is difficult, but even puberty, it goes back to, you're looking at some children nowadays, they are reaching puberty from as young as 8 or 10. And so they are exhibiting these behaviors. But, most of the times, and I've been in those systems, and it's really saddens me that people don't see, they don't question, they go to one conclusion, and it's very often, oh, this child has behavioral issues. Nobody explores what else is going on. Is it hormone? Is it something that's going on in the home? Is it something that's been affected? Is this child being bullied? Has this child been sexually assaulted? What else is going on? What's happening? And having an open discussion with that child or that young person. And I think most of the times professionals are so scared to have these discussions because they feel worried that they can't manage it, or some people are threatened by losing their jobs, and all of those things come into play. So I think some things that needs to be done needs to be quite higher up in terms of the government looking at legislations that they are putting in place and how that might be affecting how people are doing their jobs. So schools are doing as much as they can, but even my child who is 10 years old, they're not explaining things in a way that he understands. You know,
Yeah.
it's a set guideline, isn't it? So somebody comes in that says, this is how you do it. And then that child lives with lots of more questions, and then they come home.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discomfort about talking about those things. And are you explaining so you can say to a child, oh, it's okay to do this? Because I've had people say to me, oh, you know, my mom said it was okay to do that, but they didn't explain what the consequences are for me doing that.
Right.
So it's really about, it's not just a one conversation that you have to have a child, it's an ongoing conversation, and providing that space for that child to feel safe to come and ask you those questions.
Of course. But also you need to educate the parents as well, because remember, we're living in different generations, and even for some parents, they're still children themselves. Do you understand what I'm saying? So they don't have the education, so they can't even pass that on, you know, so they're just going to continue a cycle, and it's just like nobody understands what's actually going on, you know. But I do want to move on swiftly, because I am mindful of time. And obviously we had Tene on Sunday, we had Leo on Monday, we had Kwame on Tuesday. Now with Kwame's story, in terms of, you know, being the only male that we had on the panel last year and also on the Instagram Live, and he was talking about he's dealt with depression and he's written a book, etc. And one of the things that he was saying is that about men not talking. So how is that in your profession? Are you still experiencing men still not talking, especially, you know, men of color, you know, as well? Are they coming forward? Are they talking? Or is it still very much suffering in silence?
Yeah, I mean, in comparison to the women that are coming through, there is still a lot of work needs to be done with getting men to come into therapy, but also getting Black men to come into therapy. I had a colleague who had a recent discussion with an actor also called Kwame, who used to be, I think he was in Casualty or something like that.
Yes, I remember. Yes. Vaguely, I can remember there was a documentary on him.
Yes, they did a show called Black Men on the Couch, and Kwame expressed how difficult it is, because very often as well, you don't have that many Black men doing therapy in the therapeutic field. So it's a role that really is much more inviting for women to go into. So there is a lot of challenges, but also men tend to work, from my experience anyway, they tend to work better with more kind of logical way of doing things. So CBT is much more attractive to them because they're able to make sense. Sometimes they struggle with, which we all mostly do, to access the emotion. And but if you have something in a logical perspective, then they're able to plow through it. And I think we need to, there is a lot of work that needs to be done to help men, particularly Black men, to access support, to access service, and not to feel as if I'm doing this, then it means that I'm less of a man, or that there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with my, you know, it's going to affect how I carry myself and how people view me. Because especially with CBT, you would find the way it's done, it takes away that stigma. It's almost like you're exploring your own pattern and it's it's collaborative, and it's not about me telling you what to do. It's about you coming up with your own answers. It's about you looking at things that you're doing, assessing your life. So it's skills learning, skills teaching. So it feels less of a challenge for people to operate in that. So we're always so busy. I'm always so busy, you know, long waiting lists all the time for CBT. And there's not that many of us, and certainly there's not that Black CBT therapists either. So
yeah, I mean, I'm listening to what you're saying and everything else, but one of the things that came to my mind was, because Kwame shared about him going to Ghana and going to the two castles, going to the twin castles, going to Amina Castle, going to Cape Coast, and talking about how they kept us as, you know, Black people when they captured us as slaves. And even when you think about that part of our history, we, especially the men, it's like they couldn't talk, you know. The woman would say to them not to say anything if the master wanted to just have his wicked way and rape this woman who's their wife. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like almost in a way, it's embedded in them that they cannot talk.
Yeah, yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is, you know, back to being a systematic way of dealing with people of color to continuously keep us in a certain way where we can't speak up, we can't express ourselves. And because of that, then we have the self-hate, have the negative thinking, because you said the majority of our brain thinks negatively anyway. So you've had that implanted into you throughout all of the generations, etc. So how can a man then come forward and say, right, I need CBT? Do you know, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. But also sometimes the system doesn't even invite them to do that. You know,
Because they don't care. Maybe the system don't care.
the
system is the one that put us in the place where we are right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's a lot going on in terms of what happens in Africa, and I think so much still needs to be done in Africa, and also, you know, the mentality and the way they do things and the way they deal with situation is not always ideal. And especially when you're coming from the West and you go over there, there is a lot of, you might experience even prejudice sometimes as well, you know.
I did experience that when I went to Ghana in 2008. I experienced it.
You know, there are things that are said where people think it's okay for them to call you coconut because you're black, or you're acting, oh, look, that white woman or that white man. And it's a bit confusing, you know, when you identify with your own black race, but when you're in your culture, they don't identify with you as being African. And that can be quite painful. So there's a lot of work that we as black people need to go and do out there. There's also a lot of trauma in Africa. Certainly a lot of places in Africa up until now are still going through civil war and discrimination within, you know, their own culture. You've got the Muslim, you've got the Christians, you've got
Christians,
you've got the dark skin. It's just ongoing, you know. That's always on the go. So, and then you've got the government that are just making things worse. You know, they're not containing their nation. They're not helping the people to grow, to move forward, and they're not helping the people to heal. You know, even when you go over there and you want to help, there is so many loopholes that you have to jump. There's so many, you know, you've got to bribe.
So when you say loopholes that you have to jump, like what? Can you give an example?
Well, you've got to bribe here, you've got to bribe there, and you've got to know it's all.
Oh, wow.
Most of the times in Africa, it's who you know. It's not what you know, it's who you know. It's also what talks is money. You know, so the oppression in Africa is real, and it still carries on. You know, that kind of difference between you know, the rich, the diversity, or even the gap between the rich and the poor is so wide, and there are so many people that are suffering. And you go there, and you know, people, you can be misled, you can be there's a lot of extortion going on there, and so you do literally can feel unsafe. But you know, that said, that is where we're from, and they are our people. But there's a lot more of Africans. We're not talking about the whole continent, but we're talking about a handful, or certainly even within the country, there are people who are doing the right things. But you know, we need to work from the system up down. And that's where the problem is. The governments in Africa is the ones that needs to change and need to address what's going on.
But with all that being said, I mean, in terms of the current state now, as we're dealing with mental health awareness, and you know, even a conversation, even myself and Leah and I had this conversation with Janelle and things like that. You know, it just doesn't seem that, as much as, you know, we're putting this out there, it just seems like people are more interested in being entertained, you know, watching reality TV show, more than being educated about how they can help their, you know, their mental health, or how can they help somebody else that may potentially have, like, you know, bipolar or depression, anxiety, etc. You know, it seems like people are more, they rather escape from it So
Yeah.
how do we, I mean, obviously I know creating platforms like this does help, but it does feel very much of, you know, the world doesn't really care. Do
Yes,
you understand what I'm saying?
it can seem like that, and sometimes services are not able to accommodate racial oppression, you know, to accommodate racial, what I call interpersonal racism. And it's also in the workplace. When you go in the workplace, you can easily be pulled into that. You have a sense of, you know, I as a Black woman have to work twice as hard. I have to be twice as educated. And even so, I have to fight my way to the top. And that in
You
itself,
have to be mindful how you speak, and you can't even
absolutely,
be yourself 100% because you're
absolutely,
looked on as the crazy Black woman in the
absolutely,
workplace.
absolutely. Absolutely. And if you feel oppressed and you're not able to express yourself, and sadly, Kaz, it also happens when you're working with other Black people. You know, want to talk about this, but you know, because they want to keep their jobs. You know, we don't want to entertain. I would rather just be blinded to this. So when you do start talking about it, or you do start to advocate racial issues, people don't want to listen. They're not interested. But for me personally, I think making space for race in the therapy room is so important, because if a person is bringing that issue, it doesn't matter what race they are, Black, white, Chinese, Indian, if they bring that into the room, I've got to make space for it. And that's one of the things that I always check for in an assessment way. Has there been any discrimination? Has there been any trauma? Has there been any sexual violence or abuse? And we need to be comfortable to be open to talk about those things, and to be able to validate and say to the person, to another person, it's okay for you to talk about these. And not be so uncomfortable with it. Yes, it's quite an uncomfortable thing to talk about, but we need to find the words. We need to bring that into the space and to allow people to share their experiences so that they can feel, what's the word? They can feel empowered to do that. Because if you as a father is able to talk about this, then you can go home and talk about it to your children, and also
That's right.
help your brothers and help your neighbor. And again, trauma is not specifically something that's only happens to one race, but when we're talking about systemic trauma, we're talking about, you know, racism, or even slavery, that's still affecting us up until now. But when we talk about those things, then it's always the elephant in the room, isn't it? You know, you can tell that someone is discriminating, or someone's saying you can't do this because of the color of your skin, but you can't talk about it. You can't raise it as an issue. So it is difficult, and it's particularly difficult for Black men, because there is always that perception that, you know, if you express yourself, if you are with a lot of energy, which comes with when you're feeling oppressed, you know, after you've been shut down for so long, eventually you're going to be frustrated, and you're going to,
of course, absolutely, you're going to react in a certain way.
And it doesn't mean you're aggressive. It just means that it might come out with a lot more force. But when it's one person doing it, it's different to when it's somebody else doing it.
Come on now.
So,
But even with that being said, I mean, you know, I don't want to make the show about race or anything like that, but I do think that's a fundamental area that needs to be discussed, especially for, you know, people of BAME, you know, for the that ethnic minority. But, you know, even when we look at the spiritual side of things, you know, like your faith and things like that. And one of the things for me that really bothers me, and I know you're a Christian, and, you know, I'm not against Christians or against Muslims or anything like that. It's nothing to do with that. But one of the things that I do strongly get really kind of irritated by is, you know, I'm not saying what happened to the Jews is not bad, what happened in terms of the Holocaust and everything else, but it seems when you go into the church, it's more or less, that's more of an area of conversation than we talking about when the majority of the people in the congregation are Black people. You don't want to even address what we've been through as a people. And I just find that really concerning. Do you understand what I'm saying? So to me, it's like, even then, if you do have these mental health issues, because, you know, we have people in the church who do suffer from certain mental health issues, and they will say, you know, just lean on this scripture. I'm not being funny or anything, but when you're thinking about jumping off a building, you can't be telling me lean on this scripture, because that's not helping me when I'm going through what I'm going through. So we need to utilize, I personally believe, utilize platforms or organizations that you can actually help those people as well. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
you're helping them, not just about learning the word of God and things like that, but you're also teaching them, even getting individuals like yourself who goes to church, getting you involved, and, you know, encouraging other people in the congregation to take interest, so that we can be training up more men and women to be able to help our people, because obviously there's a short resources there. So why are we not doing this?
Well, it's difficult, that, because if you're talking, it depends on the denomination, because we've got lots of different
Oh gosh, don't even go there about the denomination.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Churches are being led by different people. So if you're talking about the high church, looking at the Christian church, the Catholic church, or the Anglo-Catholic churches, or the Anglican churches, their system is very different. I mean, it's the same theme, Kaz. It's the same theme, that the view of Black people needs to change. The perception of Black people, it doesn't matter what platform it is, it needs to change. People need to see us in the new way, not from this kind of stereotyped, you know, Black people are this, Black people. There's a lot of fear around Black people that's not based on who we actually are. And I think that goes back, because I've been studying the Bible with there's a group called the Gathering of Christ Church. They're based in America.
Right.
And they're Hebrew, and they just teach you about the Bible and the precepts, and also the history of where things come from. And when you're able to see how it started, and how, say, the Romans or the Catholic Church have changed everything about the faith and about religion, it almost like leaves us out. You know, it's like we don't exist. You know, the Africans or the Caribbeans don't fit into this picture. You know, even the Christ that we are told to worship is different to us. So what is that communicating if you're telling a group of people that the figure that you are looking up to is different to you? That in itself is not right.
But then doesn't that then have an impact on your mental well-being as well?
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's communicating that you're not good enough. And
of course.
It's an underlying that if you look like this, then you're acceptable. So everyone else that doesn't look like that is not. So we need to be clear about what's being communicated and what's being taught here. So there is a system that is constantly trying to keep you down and keep you where they need you to be. Because if we don't keep you there, if we empower you to see yourself in a different light, then you might be out of control. And wants to.
But that's the same thing that happened in the Wall Street, right? When we look at Tulsa Street, where they, you know, we had our own banks, you know, we had our own GPs, dentists, everything, you name it. There was a part in America how many centuries of years ago, and who burned it down? Do you know what I mean? It was, Ku Klux Klan kind of people. Do you understand what I'm saying? People that didn't want to see us doing so well. And I just think in regards to us really being able to accept ourselves, that's the only way we're going to be able to start, you know, to heal it. It's really just doing that work within yourself, and also to be teaching children from a young age about the kind of challenges that you are going to come against being in this world. But you know what, we don't really go against our own people, because that's the problem. What we have right there, we are going against ourselves. And you know, that to me alone is quite frustrating, because then it's like me being against my brother and my sister, but they look exactly like me, same skin color as me, maybe from different household, etc., but I have an issue with that person, but I haven't been taught anything different. So it's a generation thing. And that's the reason why we're having our young people killing each other and everything else, because there is a lack of that education and even being told about self-care and self-loving yourself. Right now we're talking about, you know, kindness. How can you be kind to yourself if you hate yourself? It's impossible.
Yeah. And how can you be kind to someone that you look in the mirror and you don't accept? You don't accept, but other people don't accept you as well. And so we need to come from a place of educating our children to love themselves. So it doesn't matter what another person tells you. That's their opinion. You need to stay with what you know. And you are an amazing person. You know, when I work with young people or young adults, it doesn't matter whether I look at, you know, I praise them for the good that they do. Even if it's just one thing a day, you know, I congratulate them and I tell them. And you can see, you know, praises are so amazing. You can see that person just flourishing in front of you. But, you know, how many of us have parents or families that we can go to and talk to about things like that? You know, it's like, oh, I don't have time, or I'm watching this and I don't have this and that, and I'm texting my friend and you're doing everything else but actually sitting with that person and talking to them as another human being, you know. So we've got to, self-love is something that, yeah, we're born with it on some level, but we need to teach it. We need to teach it.
Definitely. So in regards to, obviously, with the pandemic and everything else, what's going on, what tips are you giving to your clients? What tips would you give to those who are watching right now to deal with this whole situation? Because like myself, I'm at home, I'm by myself, I have no family. And there's days where I spoke to you before the show, I was just like, I just want to curl up and go to my bed and keep it real to the heart, because I just felt so like, I knew that it wasn't a depression, but I was starting to feel slightly anxious from this morning. And, you know, even for me, being able to speak to somebody who kind of understands me as well, that helps hugely, but not everybody has that. So what advice would you give to somebody that is potentially going through this, and also advice to somebody that's child is similar to a vet who is going through like having mental health issues right now as well, not able to cope, not able to manage?
Yeah, I think we need to have a routine. I think routines are really, really important. And, you know, one of the things that if you think about how the brain works, when you get out of bed, when I work with whoever I work with, and I'll say to them, okay, when you wake up in the morning, make sure you have a shower, make sure you change your clothes. You don't stay in your pajamas all day long, because that's going to make you feel down and low, especially if you're just mopping around and laying in bed. And also, if you stay indoors for longer than 3 days, you're going to feel depressed. But people don't. If you stay inside for longer than 3 days, you go outside, your brain has to orient towards the sound and everything else that's going on outside.
But then people are scared. I mean, you know, you think about it, you know, you're being told that you've got to stay at home. There's this virus that's going on. People are scared. Let's be real here. Some people are just, you know, not everyone's like me that's just going to blatantly just go out there and be disobedient and go link my friends or whoever who's willing to meet me. But what I'm saying is people are scared. They're staying in their house. They're not going nowhere.
Absolutely. But you still can maintain routine in your house, you know. And I will say, stay away from social media, stay away from the news, minimize how much exposure you have to people talking about coronavirus, because there's so many, I don't even know, sometimes when the news comes on, you know, one thing that says do this, then they say don't do that, do this and don't do that. So
don't even get me started. Don't even get me started.
What is the fact? What is the fact? What's going on? People go to work, don't go to work. Stay at home, don't stay at home. Go out for, you know, it's not clear at all. So we have to take what they're saying at face value, and yes, we have to protect ourselves, but really it's about maintaining your routine, doing things that you enjoy, you know, things that you enjoy. I'm working. I'm lucky to be one of the few that are working. I know a lot of people have lost their jobs. But really, it's about also connecting with your community, you know, talking to friends on a daily basis. I think it's really important to identify friends to call. You know, when you are feeling down, who do you call? Which one of your friends can you call?
Yes, definitely.
Looking at, you know, setting small goals in your day, and, you know, being flexible with when you don't achieve something, and don't beat yourself up, don't criticize.
Yeah.
But also in terms of, you know, watching, being observant about changes in behaviors and changes that people, you know, is someone not picking up calls when you call them? They sound different when you're speaking to them. Are they, you know, are they not talking? Are they completely different to how they used to be? You know, kind of those changes in behaviors and changes in how someone is. You know, are they always sleeping? Are they oversleeping, or are they drinking? Are they doing drugs? And maybe sometimes these things are done in secrecy. But I think we need to be curious about our families and loved ones, and just let them know that there are services out there that can help them, but also that you are available for them to come to you. Because if you make that known to them and you check in, we've got to check in on each other.
Yeah, definitely.
And you know, there's it's really difficult also when you don't live with that person, right? So you don't live with that person, and that person can do the things that they want to do. But I think also what is really fundamental is go with your gut instincts.
Yes.
What is your gut telling you? What is your stomach telling you about that person? We get those, you know, we get those kind of feeling. Or you
of course, that's your instincts. That's your intuition, and and we always, most of the time, we disregard it.
Yeah,
and we listen to what, you know, society is telling us rather than be spirit led. And that's what I really called being spirit led.
Yes,
do you understand what I'm saying?
Spirit led. It is being spirit led, because you can have a sense. There is sometimes that you're saying, even when we go into relationships that are unhealthy, the ones that are not so good for us, you get that first instinct, that initial reaction. You say, there's something about that person that's not quite right. But we bypass that because we like them, or, you know, we like the way they look, and we bypass those feelings. But trust your gut instincts, because they don't lie. And I think it's about looking after each other. But also, I think really assessing yourself regularly, you know, check in on yourself. How am I feeling today? You know, what's different? What am I doing differently? Have I stopped doing anything? Can I reintroduce those things back into my life? You know, is it my hormone? Is it just really having some self introspection, self-reflection, and really get to know you and be your friend.
That's right. Because you have the time now. You have the time. And I think that's another thing where we have this time. We'll never get this time again. Do you know what I mean? Kind of thing. And it's really just like Coach Carla even expressed on one of the lives, that it is about a time to reposition. It's about reframing. It's about resetting yourself. You understand what I'm saying? So like you're saying, it's going back to finding that time. Like for myself, I'm just like doing various different things just to deal with my development, and just to find me and to love myself unconditionally, you know. So, but my other question that I asked was in regards to, like, I'm very, very mindful of time, but if we can be really quite quick with this one, in terms of like someone like Yvette who's got a daughter or got a son that is just don't even know that they're not well, but they are just acting not themselves. What advice do you give that person? What should they do?
Yeah, I would say really just be a mum, be a person to that person and say, what's going on? You need help. Because very often we just, they're an adult, we can just let them get on with it. But sometimes people don't know when they're stuck. People don't know when they're in problems.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's not about knowing that you're stuck. I mean, when you listen to Yvette's story, it wasn't a thing where a daughter was stuck. Her behavior changed. She just wasn't herself mentally. She didn't even know. She was hearing voices. She thought people was coming for her and things like that. So I think that's something completely different about being stuck. That's somebody who's definitely just has got a mental health issue going on like that. So what advice would you give to somebody?
In those instances, you will be looking at calling the emergency service.
Right.
You know, straight up. If somebody is lost capacity, call 999.
Right.
That's the best way to go. You can't rely on.
But if they're scared because of corona and everything else, they don't want to dial 999. Do you know what I'm saying?
Samaritans are quite good. But I think it's, you know, bringing that person to your home. I know mental health you know, especially when it's psychosis, is really difficult to manage in the home, but really it's about getting your family to support you through this, you know, taking that person, caring for them, loving them, letting them know that you're there, and, you know, using the services. They are stretched, and sometimes you, especially in this time, really don't leave that person on their own, because the mind can tipple over so quickly.
Yeah,
you can stay with them. If you can go and get them to come and stay with you, we need to do things like that. We need to bring that kind of care and humanity again into our lives and into our families.
Yeah, but if you say, like, I understand what you're saying in terms of like just bringing them in and just, you know, looking after them so they don't flip or go even worse. But if you don't have the space, if you don't have that room, I mean, you know, these are the things that some people are up against. And even still, furthermore, that person may not necessarily want to come and stay with you. You can't force them to.
Yeah. And this is why, you know, when if I'm with someone who has an episode in front of me, I can try my best to keep that person calm, but I would be taking them to the hospital, because they have the facility, you know, they have the facility to help them. We need to know that, I know it's the COVID that's going on, but you can't, you know, you need to weigh up whether you want to keep that person. If you're able to keep that person at home and look after them, that's fine, but get the additional support. Call the Samaritans, call the police, I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult to do that sometimes, but get help. Universities there, they've got mental health services in university. If it's a young person, a young adult, schools are also equipped to deal with those kind of challenges. CAMS are there, which is, you know, the child and adolescent mental health services. They're there for you to get the local authority can also intervene as well. They have lots of volunteers helping people at the moment, you know, so contact your local authority. They are amazing. I've been in touch with them as well, because I'm on complete lockdown for 12 weeks or whatever, because I had pneumonia in the past. So I'm stuck in the house, you know, I'm playing guitar and I'm doing all these things that I wouldn't have done before. But, you know, don't leave them by themselves, especially if they've gone that far. Get as much support.
Janelle asked the question, how can people get CBT?
Your GP can refer you, but you can also self-refer to an IAPT service. You can get CBT. Also, we've got our body, which is BABCP. So you can go on there. There are a list of therapists on there as well. So you can self-refer. You can go to your GP. You can call charities that offer CBT, and you can call an IAPT, which is the local NHS.
Right, to get like a referral or something like that. So it's like going to like single point of access, that kind of thing, to get connected that way.
Psychological therapy. So you can self-refer as well. Your local authority, people don't call the local authority enough. They are so helpful. You know, your local town hall, they can local town hall is so helpful. They've made so many different changes, but people often don't call them for these kind of support. So I
didn't know that. I just thought I had to just go through my GP. I didn't realize the local authority could be of assistance.
They're so clued up. They've got, you know, it's called connecting. In Westminster, you've got a system called Connecting, and they can put you across, you know, link you into different services. So do call them as well. So your GP, your local IAPT, which is Improving Access to Psychological Therapy, IAPT, universities, they offer CBT and counselling, schools, or your CAMS, the child and adolescent services within the local authority. Worst case scenario, call the police or the emergency services, especially when things are gone too bad.
Thank you so much, Zainab.
Anyone can contact me. I can send them a list of services in the country.
So guys, you've got Zainab's Instagram information, so obviously use that, DM her, message her. She is available. She will provide you information. Any of your questions, I'm sure you would do your absolute best to answer those questions for them. Absolutely. So I'm going to just say thank you so much. Has anybody got any questions before we actually end end this live. We've only got 27 6. Anyway, guys, good night. If you didn't answer questions, I do apologize, but thank you, Zainab. You've been absolutely awesome. And good night, everybody. Bye.
Have a lovely weekend. Bye, everyone.
Same to you. Bye.
Bye.